Welcome everybody to our panel on Future TV, as we call it, and to give Peter a little bit more time to figure out the technology side. Let me frame our discussion a little bit before we go into it, and before I also introduce again the panelists of this evening's discussion. I think as a starting point, talking about the future of television, it's always a good thing to remind ourselves about the presence, and as Marcel alluded, television is, in fact, in most markets we're talking about the #1 medium, both in terms of penetration, also in terms of usage. Here in this country, we see on average almost 3.5 hours of daily usage of television, and that's absolutely second to none in terms of media usage. And therefore, I think this part makes it so exciting. Digital television, this is really where the digital revolution can and will impact everyday life in a, you could argue, much more profound way than in any other area we've seen so far. In fact, when I was sort of scribbling out the remarks I wanted to make to open this panel, I found it a little difficult to concentrate because I was sitting on a plane next to a young woman who was watching a comedy show on her iPhone and was laughing her way through to Dublin, which made it kind of a difficult time. It was not difficult to figure out who had the better time. But I've been following the markets now for almost 20 years in terms of convergence, and I think that was a real point in case that we're not talking so much about the future, but really very much about the reality today. And we believe, looking at the market, that we are, in fact, seeing a tipping point. The television markets around the globe in most major economies are changing, are going to change quite profoundly, because there are three elements coming to play which have been, or parts of them have been missing over the last few years. The three things I would want to call out is #1, technology. The technology to deliver both high quality but also interactive television is there. And not in the sense it has been developed in the labs. It's really out there in the markets, both in terms of networks, both in terms of consumer equipment in the hands of the consumers. And a lot of the elements and things we need to have are in fact reaching mass market penetration levels in a lot of markets we're looking at. Does that mean that all the technological puzzle is solved? Clearly no. I would compare the stage of digital television to where the mobile data market has been before the iPhone has launched. Technically speaking, all was there as well, but still no one has figured out the puzzle from a consumer point of view, and that's clearly something we need to have in place going forward. #2 is consumer behavior. Point in case, the story I was just telling you on the airplane, the way consumers choose to watch television and video changes very profoundly, both in terms of the screens they use, but also when they watch television. Time-shifted formats, on-demand formats are on the rise. If you look at the US market, about 10% of total video and television usage is already happening in these new formats or on these new screens. Last, certainly not least, the players are taking this much more seriously. We see, and we're going to hear about that on the panel in a couple of minutes. There are some very significant moves from both traditional and non-traditional players, again, looking to the US, Hulu, some of the big broadcasters launching a very remarkable online venture, but also we already heard a couple of times Google TV, Apple TV, new players entering that space in a very significant and meaningful way. One of the big questions, as we have it in all digital media markets, is how does these changes in consumption translate into euro or dollars? And we've been looking from Booz & Company into these markets quite extensively over the last 3 to 4 months. The way we look at it right now is, despite all the potential value erosion out there, we still believe that there is profound growth potential in the TV ecosystem. But if you break it down more closely, it's very clear that most of the growth doesn't come out of traditional value pools, most notably television advertising, and will be spurred by more by interactive elements in the application side, like e-commerce, like games, like betting. So, in a nutshell, there's a lot of change to be observed, but also a lot of questions to be answered, and I'm very happy to have some of, I think you could argue, the most pronounced figures in terms of companies who have changed the television markets across Europe over the last decade and who are clearly part of the shakers of the makers who are going to drive this change going forward. From right to left, from your side, I welcome Brian Sullivan, CEO of Sky Deutschland. He brings a lot of experience in the pay TV space in particular, having held many different senior positions at BSkyB in particular, and is translating this experience now to the German market, as we heard, with remarkable success, actually, for those who follow the market here in Germany for some time. Next to him, Ynon Kreiz, CEO of Endemol. Endemol, not only one of the European creative powerhouses, but now one of the leading global players in terms of TV production. Formats like Big Brothers, Deal No Deal, I think pretty much defines the DNA where you're coming from. But Endemol has expanded in a lot of different areas, different genres, and also new technologies, if you want. And we are clearly curious to hear about it. Last not least, Peter Hirshberg from Starling TV. Peter is also, if I may say, a veteran of the Silicon Valley, has been in many new technology ventures, had a long stance at Apple at the beginning, different sits at different boards or acts as an advisor at companies like Glam, and is joining us here in his capacity as the chairman of Starling TV, a new venture combining social media and television. So if you want a new player in the television scene, and we are obviously very curious to hear the different perspectives. As I said, we're going to look at a lot of change, analyzing change, looking into the future is also always a little bit of looking in the crystal ball, and I think it's very interesting to understand a little bit where you stand. So I will ask you at the beginning if you want to give us a little glimpse in your personal crystal ball. What are the changes you see if you look at the television markets of the next 4 to 5 years? What will drive these changes? And if you think there are areas where the talk might be exaggerated, we are interested to hear that as well. Brian, I would ask you to kick us off for that.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. I was trying to think of how I should open up my little, hopefully only about 2 minutes of this session over the weekend. And obviously the thing that we're ultimately being asked is our views on the future of television. But I have a pretty firm view that anybody who tells you they understand what the future of television is, the only thing you can be sure of is that they're wrong. And that the change that will come about during the next, to use your time frame, next 5 years, but I would extend that to next 5 to 10 to 15 years, is actually fairly unpredictable, at least from a specific perspective. So I choose to take a bit of a step back and think about it from a more macro point of view. And I was struck by 2 things that happened to me yesterday, literally yesterday, Sunday. The way that my day started and the way that my day ended. And the way that my day started was I woke up at an ungodly early hour of the morning, because I happen to have 3 young children, to some noise upstairs. Still dark out. And I went upstairs, and after tripping over 1 or 2 toys that had been left out, I found my 3-year-old daughter sitting in my living room, actually with that iPad right in front of her, watching, if I remember the name of the show properly, Phineas and Ferb. Do any of you know the show? Possibly the single best television show made in the last decade, by the way. I've never showed her how to do that. Her older brother or older sister may very well have showed her. I know that she has watched it alongside them on traditional television and on the pad when we've been on trips, but she was there by herself and not only had found the iPad, but she was sitting down in the middle of the floor and she had navigated through the UI and found the program and was watching it and was absolutely, completely happy. That's how my day started. My day ended with my 9-year-old son having to work on a homework assignment. And the homework assignment was to take a news story and turn it into a myth, and to write it in the style of a myth. And he's an amazing kid, but as all kids are like, he's not particularly interested in doing homework late on a Sunday night when he might be able to do 1 or 2 more things before he has to go to bed. Yet he was completely and utterly engaged in the process. He found a news story online about a Japanese boy who had just broken a record with DDR, the dance game. And he was completely engaged in rewriting this entire story and using descriptive language in a fashion that I've never seen him actively engaged before. And the conclusion of this is I walked away thinking the same thing that I think most of us think when we're really honest about us, which is the future of television doesn't lie in this room, it doesn't lie in this conference, it lies in the children around us and the ways that they will consume media and entertainment going forward. And I am still ultimately a believer in the power of storytelling. Storytelling may change in its structure, it may change in its composition, it may change in its delivery, but ultimately I think that the televisual experience as an experience of sharing storytelling, just as I believe in the same with writing and journalism, will endure. It will go around in a giant circle and it will rematerialize in a new fashion, something that maybe we're not particularly familiar with. There may be new form factors and there may be new deliveries, but I'm actually incredibly positive about the future of television. I just can't tell you exactly what it's going to be in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you very much. We all know predictions are difficult, in particular when they refer to the future. So, Ynon, up or down the value chain, however you want to call it, give us your glimpse. And obviously, we all know nobody knows what the future brings. But I would be interested, if there are particular trends and things you feel strongly about, you're really convinced, just on a personal level, that this will happen. I would like to hear that.
Well. Apparently yesterday, Jim Breyer from Excel, I think is here in the room, was saying that television is dead, it's over. And that kind of reminded me of horror films. Remember Friday the 13th, where the killer keeps being hit and they kill him in the end and he keeps coming back. And just when he's actually dead, there's a sequel, and then you keep making money in the process. So that's kind of, television. I don't think television is dead. In fact, I think it's very much alive and kicking. But what's really interesting is not what is going to be when television comes to the internet. I think everyone is trying to figure that out, from Hulu to Vudu to iPlayer. I think what is really interesting is what will happen when internet will come to the television. Because right now, almost every new TV set, every new plasma screen that is being manufactured in Asia or wherever is being produced with the online connectivity, wireless connection, in most cases, right in the system with motherboard. 25% of television sets come with motherboard. So this is a huge processing power that is going to be right in the main screen in the house, in the biggest and most comfortable room in most cases. So what would that do? Now, I'd like to take a little bit of a contrarian view. Everyone says that social television will be big. And I think that it's not going to be big, it's going to be huge. Because think what will happen, think what happened to when Steve Jobs, who was one of the smartest people in our generation, had to go through to create a new ecosystem from scratch. Think what iTunes became today between iPhone and iPad and so forth. And you take that and look at the television industry, which has a huge ecosystem with billions of dollars already being spent, relationships between advertisers, broadcasters, rating system, everything is already working, and marry that with social media. And we're not just talking about MySpace, MySpace of course, but Facebook with 500, 600 million users, whatever the number is, plus many other local strong players. You combine them together and you get an eruption. And we think that social media meets television is the next big thing. And what will happen is the ability of creating content that will marry the ability of people to interface between themselves, to connect, to recommend, to share an experience over television is going to change our landscape, the landscape of the industry. Now, it's not perfect yet. It's still a bit clunky technology in terms of the user interface with the remote. We're not there yet, and it may help us a little bit if we could reach, maybe if our arm was maybe 4 or 5 meters long, would have been a little easier to manage an interface with a television set, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen, and what I would do right now, if I were you, I would get up, leave this room, don't listen to what we're about to tell you, go to your garage, your room, your office, and try to figure it out, because whoever figures that out will be the next Steve Jobs of this generation.
Thank you. This is what we call a Steilvorlage in German for Peter, talking about social television, because that's obviously your sweet spot. But as we were discussing before, I know you've done quite a bit of research also in terms of consumer behavior, technology trends, and have a very clear view how the markets will evolve. So I don't want to pass on that. Yeah. And we will have obviously time to dive into social television as well. Please, Peter.
What I find interesting is that Hollywood and Silicon Valley have had this kind of uneasy relationship for years. And 2 years ago, when I was thinking of doing a startup in this space, and I said this to other people in Silicon Valley, they looked at me and they go, television? Why would you do that? And would that have a future? And meanwhile, the people in LA, I think, still were incredibly leery of us. And what I find amazing is the incredible amount of innovation that's gone on in the last year. In a space that was completely not crowded a year ago when we were thinking of doing what we're doing, the number of startups that are in the social TV space, in the distribution space, in reworking how directories work, the speed with which the cable operators are reacting and realizing they have to show up everywhere, the fights that go on every day over access, you see this battle that's gone from kind of, it was boring to people to the center of action. So one thing, to echo what you were saying, that we're clearly going to see is audiences are going to make TV better. I mean, one of the interesting things about social and TV is the thing that's happened to the rest of the media is when the audience showed up and started having a role, it completely transformed it. So, first the bloggers showed up with journalism, and then they showed up with the marketers who were not particularly happy. They showed up, and it improved that. And when I was talking to Esther Dyson about this, who said, well, I don't really watch a lot of television, but the one thing I know is when you hook the audience back to it and they're feeding back, boy, it's going to be a stronger medium. And that's, I think, what we're beginning to see now. So I think one big trend we're going to see is that there's a lot of vibrancy going on because the audience is going to have a role. And it's an engagement role, and there's actually content in what they're doing. Another clear thing is, as you're pointing out, the distinction between the traditional providers and the online providers starts to evaporate and go away. And we're also seeing, I think, a lot of innovation in the production community. I mean, the most interesting storytellers in Hollywood are beginning to realize that you can tell a story that evolves linearly and at the same time has a game that may be making a lot of money, at the same time has an offline component, and there's so many more ways of reaching someone. A year ago at DLD, Tim Kring was here, and he was talking about what his experience had been with Heroes, and just the other day, his new pilot got funded, and the entire premise behind that is it's going to happen in multiple media. And to your point about consumer behavior, you see, like anything that has a tipping point, you see it start slowly and then it changes. So there's a lot of talk about cord cutters. Are people abandoning traditional paid TV for other environments? And in fact, I think in the US, there was something like 4% had cut the cord a year ago, but it was up to like 6.5% this year. So you saw a doubling, but on a small base. The part that I find most interesting is if you watch how young people behave, they're actually perfectly adapted to kind of more of this over-the-top environment. A woman who works for me who kind of handles research for us, she has a very simple equation. $7 or whatever is $8 for Netflix, Hulu is free, and then because she has Apple, there's the option to pay 99 cents for a show that if she needs it. So, you know, you have the traditional world that's going to attrit very slowly, and then you have the new world that's kind of rewriting the rules. And I think the next 2 or 3 years is all about jockeying for that stuff.
Thanks, Peter. I think I want to pick up on that point. I mean, looking at the combination Netflix and Hulu over the top, for those not familiar with it, Netflix is a DVD, started as a DVD rental firm, which was sort of sending out, posting DVDs to consumers, grow actually quite substantially on that basis in the US. Turned the model online, is now offering a $7.99 all-you-can-eat movie package. Obviously, looking at that, Brian, you could argue that these type of offerings could eat quite substantially into traditional premium television. What is your view on that? Is that danger or more of an opportunity for you?
I think our view here is probably slightly different than the industry view in other places. And that's because the pay TV market here in Germany has been an aborted attempt or a stagnated market for such a long period of time that if we are now finally starting to see it to enter a growth mode and become something more substantial, then because we're starting at such a lower base, opportunities are far more interesting than they are, new opportunities are far more interesting than they are threatening, as long as we can find a way of making sure that we can play in that space and be part of it. So things like the Netflix and the Hulus, to use those as an example, or even just traditional video on demand, which has been in a relatively mature market in the States and the UK and a few other places for a long period of time. The thing that we try to pay attention to is trying to find as much flexibility with ease of use and simplicity of consumption as possible for a very specific reason, which is when you move at least into the living room, and let's face facts, media consumption, particularly video consumption, is spreading everywhere now. But when you're talking about in the living room, where there still is a lot of consumption, there's far less of a desire to have to do too much in order to be able to get to what you're really trying to get to, which is just sit down, watch something, and have some fun. And the experience that we want to be able to deliver is simplifying that as much as we possibly can. The example that I keep coming back to in my head is the UK numbers that came out of Barb last year for viewership between video on demand and PVR, which ultimately, from a user experience, slightly different ways of getting to the same thing, but it's effectively on-demand content. Video on demand only accounts for 1.7% of all viewing in the UK. Yet PVR accounts for 28.9% of viewing in PVR homes. And we keep asking ourselves, why is that? Because theoretically, going through a menu and finding the content should be, with a far deeper, or at least a quick on-demand content, should be a better experience. But it turns out, from all that we've been able to find from talking from customers, is that actually that discovery and curation factor that all of the channels that are out there provide, because they do specialize in certain types of content married with the PVR, ends up providing the better experience, because the people are creating their own libraries to their own tastes. There are 10 million households that subscribe to B-Sky-B, 20 million plus homes, and I guarantee you for every one of those PVRs, there's not one library of content that's exactly the same to somebody else's. So that customization factor is quite important, and the ease of use of access into it is quite important. So we're very focused on trying to make sure that we can find where that path is through this new world of increasing choice and increasing control, because there's no way that that's not going to happen. And it's a big part of where we're going to exploit our proposition going forward over the next couple of years.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, you kept referring back to the UK. I mean, we see Germany has always had the reputation of being one of the most difficult premium television market, and you've been sort of co-writing one of the most successful pay TV stories with B Sky B. On a more personal note, did you have this moment moving here to Germany where you said, oh my God, what did I get myself into here? I mean, is it that much different from a market point of view, or is it just the way it was treated or handled?
Listen, I don't know yet. I certainly had that oh my God moment. That was about 3 months into the role. But the only thing that I've been able to tell with certainty so far is that that developments here are about 5 to 10 years behind any other market. But in terms of consumer behavior, what people watch, what they don't watch, what they're interested in subscribing in, what they're not, what they're doing online, what they're not, I think there's a lot of myths that Germany somehow is uniquely different, but the consumer behavior seems to be very, very much the same. People are willing to pay for something if they're going to get a better experience and more convenience. It doesn't matter if there's a lot of quote-unquote free-to-air choice. If there's enough differentiation, people will make that leap into something else. Consumption of entertainment is just as strong, if not stronger, than it is in other marketplaces. So to me, it boils down to what it always boils down to in any market, which is you have to have something that is different enough that somebody's willing to pay you for. And if you don't, they're just not going to take it, or they're going to walk away. My favorite stat from my perspective, and it's just from my little corner of the world, is 6 million households in Germany have paid for TV at some point in time in the last 5 years, but 3.5 million of them canceled because they had such a crappy experience, either in terms of the quality of the content or the service that was behind it. And ultimately, that's got to be my first objective, which is just making sure that they get what they're paying for.
Ynon, we talked a lot about ease of use, how people consume video TV, what kind of screen they use, not so much about the content. What are the key trends you see in terms of content development, if any? Does that change, or is it essentially the same old wine in new packages, as we would say? What are the key changes on the content side of the equation?
Well, the content market is very crowded, and everybody is trying to rise above the noise level. And there's no magic formula to create a hit. You can't come to your creative people and say, please make a hit. But what we do try to create is an experience. And there's a pretty big trend at Endemol right now where we try to combine great programming making with the ability to extend that beyond the television. And maybe one of the best examples is one of our new shows called the Money Drop, which is basically Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in reverse. You start the game with £1 million or dollars or shekels, and you try to hold on to them by answering questions, and the money falls through a trap door if you get the wrong answer. But what's interesting about this show is that we created it from the outset with an online application, a game that launched at the same time as the show went on air, and people were able to play the show in the living room alongside what was on their TV set. And that proved to be a home run. We had about 450,000 people playing the game live online when we launched the game in the UK. That trend made the show the #1 trend on Twitter worldwide for 3 days. And as a result of that success, we then rolled the show, now already sold in 16 countries. And wherever it goes, it's been so far a runaway hit. In America, it launched recently, and it's building up. It's not yet a hit, but it's building up very well, and we're very proud of that experience. And as a company, we're orienting all of our creative people to think outside of the television screen. It's more than television. It's got to be a center of gravity that brings people to the screen, but offer them a much broader experience.
Peter, as we said in the beginning, I mean, again, social media seems to be one element of this new format. This is, you're right, in the center of that development. Could you give us your point of view? How do you see this part of the market, this element, evolving?
You know, if you look at all of the stuff that we figured out on the internet recently about game mechanics and how that engages people and how it spreads virally, boy, that stuff is amplified when you're dealing with audiences of millions of people. So the DNA switching or hopping from all of that to television back and forth just makes perfect sense. I mean, you think about game shows, we're kind of onto these ideas way back when, but when you bring them together, it's huge. The other thing we see is it drives audiences. You would think that everybody on Facebook and Twitter and doing other things would distract them and they'd pay less attention, there'd be less TV. And the alchemy is they're watching more. And, you know, the MTV's seen this hugely. The Video Music Awards went from like 7 to 11 million viewers over several years because of Twitter and because it turns out that what was DVR television, when you turn it back into a live event because you're watching with your friends, it goes up. So these two things that you would think would fight each other are very compatible. And that's the basis of a lot of the work that we've been up to, that insight. And if you want, I can show you a little bit about that.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to just, we were talking earlier and I realized it was probably better to show you than to explain this. So the thing that we've been up to, so Starling, of which I'm honored to be chairman, Declan Caulfield's our CEO, who comes from Endemol, and from, not Endemol, from Fremantle and from Bertelsmann, and Kevin Slavin, who is our head of products, his company, Area Code was his company. He built many, many games for TV, and that company was just sold to Zynga, but he's leading products for us, and we've had just some great talent in our team. So if you kind of go back in history. You know, in the 1950s, CBS had this show, Winky Dink and Me, in which they actually inspired kids to go up and interact with the TV. Audiences have wanted to have a role, something to do for years. And so here this girl is like drawing in an overlay, and you notice the rest of the audience is like engaged in what she's doing. This thing came back in the 1970s when Warner invented Cube and basically said there'll be interactivity. And then it kind of all went into remission. Although when things like instant messaging were created, one of the first things you talked about was television. And so Twitter has found that television in many ways is its killer app because it's a thing for which there's lots of conversation. Here's the Twitter conversation about the MTV show Skins. Now the problem with this is great for MTV because you can see the whole conversation. If it's a political campaign, you know what's going on. But if you're the audience, this doesn't really feel like media. It doesn't feel like entertainment, and it's like, how do you follow that? And that's the thing that we were challenged to think about. The question was, what would social media look like for visual media? You know, someone might make a comment, but the idea is, how could you put that back in an environment that looked like TV? So here it is, for example, sitting on an image from the show. And our metaphor is to use a card or these images where you create something, and it actually feels like the look of the show. And that object can be liked and shared and voted on and have a range of game mechanics behind it. So this is kind of what the Starling Interface looks like. Over there on the right, I can write something and it enters a stream, and I'm actually sharing it with my social graph. It automatically figures out, like, who do I care about who's watching? So, for example, I might make a comment. And by the way, the show that I'm talking about, Skins, is this MTV show that has been controversial. It's a drama aimed at teens, and I made this comment that DLD can out-party these kids anytime. And in this case, I'm playing a card that looks like me, although I could pick one of the characters. And I throw it out there, and you can see on the bottom, someone else said something, and someone commented on it. And so this is what it looks like. This is actually kind of a graphic. When we were testing this with Glee, you actually see someone writing things on the right. That's Glee playing, and comments are going in. So you actually have this sense of, there's a bunch of your friends watching, here's what they're saying, and you're going back and forth. We actually kept the word short because the images tell a lot of the story. And between these two things, that's kind of what it feels like. So this is what the production value looks like for Skins. This will be the show that's on the air tonight. And then there's applications of game mechanics. So it turns out if somebody likes my card or what I said, new cards are unlocked. It's a form of up-leveling. Likewise, if my cards spread or I like someone else's, it basically creates this scarcity, and that's what gets me more engaged. In the case of the show with MTV, they want to be able to share a song with you. So here they're actually dropping a song so virtual or digital goods can be disseminated. So that's kind of the basis of our view of how you can start to apply game mechanics and social and kind of engagement with your social graph to TV. And this is one of kind of many efforts to kind of grow this whole thing.
Thanks very much, Peter. Any sort of insight in terms of consumer adoption with the soft launch?
Oh, yeah, we learned a couple of things. You know, we did a test with a Travel Channel show called Ghost Adventures. It's kind of a Ghostbuster show. And one thing we found was that in that show, people really love the crazy gear, you know, all these ghost testing, you know, ghost busting things. And so the cards they played told us that's what they cared about the most. And when the show ended, we turned the room off, and the audience got pissed. They created a hashtag, and they continued talking over on Twitter. So and then without promoting it, the audience kept doubling. So there seems to be some effect that audiences like find each other, and there's, even if they don't know each other, there's an affinity, and that was a really interesting thing that we found. The other thing we found is if you put a bunch of people in the same room and try it, it doesn't work so well, because there are all these social cues. We're talking to each other. It's like, I don't know, it'd be like putting us all in the same room and using dating software. It'd be backwards. But when you put them in different rooms, then the magic takes off because they're feeling a connection. And so that's some of the stuff that we've been learning.
Thanks. Ynon, you also wanted to add one comment on the content side.
No, well, I mean, when you try to create compelling content, it's all about, you know, what do people want to watch. And, you know, we at Endemol make worldwide more than between 200 to 300 new shows a year. And as we like to say, some of them are actually good. And the idea is how do you sift through that and find the winners? And there's no one answer to that. The issue is how do you localize content? This is a huge part of the criteria to fit formats to the local audience and tailor global formats that travel the world that meet the needs of local audience.
Thank you. Just switching gears a little, I just wanted to take the opportunity. I mean, we didn't touch a lot on the competitive scenario, but obviously there's a lot of convergence going on in all sorts of dimensions. Endemol has a very peculiar history in terms of convergence with Telefonica, one of the big oops of convergence history, if you want. I know it was before your tenure, but I would be interested, I'm sure you looked into it. Are there any lessons learned of that story you would share with us?
I think when Telefonica bought the company in 2001, and this was probably a great idea that happened maybe 10 years or so ahead of its time. The company was never really took advantage of being owned by a platform, and always remained very focused on making great television shows. At the core, we used to work exclusively with our own creative people, and about 90% of our bottom line used to come from our own creativity. We also used to be very focused on reality and non-scripted television shows. What we've done in the last few years, we started to work with the third-party creative people. We missed on a whole trend. We did not work with Simon Cowell and Simon Fuller and those people. We were focused on our own creativity, but this is now changing for us, and we're now working with one of the best creators in the world, the likes of Jerry Seinfeld and many other creative people, to open our platform and offer it for creative minds worldwide. We also diversified a lot of the content that we make. We got into scripted, and we expect that this year in 2011, scripted will account for approximately 25% of our business, drama, comedy, and the like. So the company changed, reacted to market dynamics, reacted to the need of diversified content, of localized content, of new forms, to cater for what the broadcasters require. And now the next generation for what we do is to find ways to leverage new technology and use our creativity, arguably the world's best minds in game shows and the like, and offer that in the online environment. In the last month, we launched 10 new social applications, including a partnership with the Foursquare, that is a show that we're now developing, all the way to working with Kobe Bryant, who has his own social application. Now we are his partner, to shows, to applications that extend our own brands, like Big Brother, Deal or No Deal, Wipeout, and the like. So there's a lot going on. You want to be everywhere. You have to be omnipresent while you at the same time have to be very local, very targeted, and remain very commercial, regardless of who are your owners.
Brian, as we are running out of time, the final word goes to you by definition, almost. I just wanted to touch on one point. You said there is still a lot of growth opportunity in the market. I know you launched a number of innovation initiatives at Sky, the iPad app probably being the most tangible or notable one in this market. We're talking about growth going forward. Where do you see the biggest growth opportunity, in particular outside of the core business model? Are there any of the new areas we discussed where you feel this is going to be relevant for you?
If I can take 1 second to kind of cut back into the core conversation that was happening here for a second in terms of the role of social in the future television landscape. I'm a relatively simple man, and I'm quite unfortunately getting slightly older, and I find myself sometimes playing the anorak in the room, which I hate. But I do view things kind of simply. And there are a million different roles that the emerging connectivity that social media brings to bear will have. But I actually think one of them is slightly retro in a good way. Personally, I think the water cooler is being recreated. And bear with me for 1 second. People constantly ask why the PVR has been so successful and traditional video on demand has yet to be. And that's always come down to me to a very simple thing, which is people haven't fallen out of love with television. They still love entertainment. But our lifestyles don't fit primetime anymore. And all the PVR did was take all that great entertainment, 70,000 hours per week, and allow you to restructure it on your individual life structure, which is different than Peter's, it's different than everybody's in this room. And it kind of brought that power of television back. But one of the other things we've lost is this whole idea of content discovery and conversation and creation and feedback that prime time in the water cooler used to have. Work environments have changed, TV structures have changed, schedules have changed. And when I look at the influence that we have today, that's coming today from social media on our business, the most powerful one, at least initially, is the fact that actually it's helping people to discover great content and to have a conversation about it, and hopefully in the future to be able to influence it. Yeah, the one example I think that Peter used was just what's happened with Glee, which it started with a TV show that everybody thought might make it, might not, and then it's turned into a whole multimedia landscape with live shows, soundtracks, and so on and so forth. But if you ask me, as you did, where I see the biggest opportunity for us in the medium term or short term future, it's about, to a certain small extent, breaking down the wall of the traditional television and bringing the entertainment experience more flexibility and more integration with the audience. And social helps with that integration with the audience. New form factors like the pad help us with breaking down those walls. Being able to use multiple form factors, the pad as well as the television simultaneously, I think are going to be quite powerful as well. I still ultimately believe in the core power of television, but I think it's just going to become more fun. And whoever figures out how to make it more fun is going to win.
Thank you very much. Looking at the time, unfortunately, I have to wrap it up. And I mean, picking up on your thought, we had a lot of discussions over the last decade that the fragmentation of the television landscape sort of takes away the power of television as a family medium, if you want, bringing together the people in the living room and sharing this experience. And if I take it, social media, ironically to some extent, is exactly bringing that back, taking television also to the roots. And as we heard in the panel today, I think one of the big questions is to figure out how to do it exactly, and also, as always in business, how to monetize it profitably. With that, I want to end it. Thank you very much for participating. And
thank you.